My name is Lena, and I speak a language that has no alphabet. It's a language of logic gates, of elegant algorithms, of ones and zeros that blossom into entire worlds behind a screen. For the past 3 years, this language has been my obsession, my entire universe. I used it to build ConnectSphere, an application that was going to be my masterpiece, my gift to a world drowning in digital noise. It wasn't just an app. It was a philosophy coded into existence, designed to foster genuine human connection, not just mindless scrolling. I was the architect of that world, the ghost in the machine. My husband, Ben, was the sun. He was the charismatic frontman, the visionary who could sell my complex code as a simple, beautiful dream. And my best friend, Sarah, was the artist who gave my world its color, its texture, its soul. We were a perfect team, a Silicon Valley fairy tale in the making, or so I believed. Ben and I were the classic pairing, the nerd and the prom king. I fell for his dazzling smile and his boundless ambition during a hackathon in college. He, in turn, was fascinated by the way I could command a computer to do my bidding. He didn't understand my language, but he respected its power. He saw the fire behind my quiet exterior. Sarah was my other half since freshman year. We learned to navigate the male-dominated world of tech together, 2 women against the world. She was the yin to my yang. Where I saw structure and code, she saw beauty and design. Starting a company with the 2 of them wasn't a business decision. It was the most natural thing in the world. For 3 years, our tiny apartment was our headquarters. While Ben was out networking, charming investors with a prototype I'd built in a weekend, and Sarah was crafting the perfect user interface, I was in the trenches. I was the one pulling all-nighters, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a relentless passion, writing hundreds of thousands of lines of code. The core of ConnectSphere was its revolutionary algorithm, something I had designed from scratch. It analyzed user behavior not to sell them ads, but to understand their emotional needs, gently nudging them towards more meaningful interactions. It was complex, beautiful, and it was entirely mine. The last 6 months were a blur of 18-hour days. We were on the verge of a breakthrough, a final presentation to Vanguard Ventures, the biggest VC firm in the Valley. A deal with them meant we weren't just a startup anymore. We were the future. The pressure was immense. Ben grew more distant, his days filled with investor meetings that ran late into the night. Sarah was often with him, he said, to handle the design-centric queries. I didn't question it. I was too busy, too focused on perfecting the code. I trusted them. They were my family. The night before the presentation was the culmination of everything. At 4 a.m., I finally compiled the final version of the code. It was perfect. Clean, fast, elegant. I saved it to our shared server, a digital culmination of my life's work, and sent a simple text to Ben and Sarah. It's done. The sphere is complete. I collapsed into bed, my mind buzzing with equal parts exhaustion and exhilaration. It was the last time I would ever feel that kind of pure, unadulterated hope. I woke up at 9 a.m. to an empty apartment. I remember feeling a pang of annoyance. They could have woken me up. Our meeting was at 11. I showered, put on my best and only suit, and my phone buzzed. It was a calendar notification, not from our shared company account, but from a public one. Evolve, the future of connection. Live press conference at 10 a.m. I frowned. Evolve? What was that? Some competitor trying to steal our thunder? I opened the link to the live stream. The press conference was already underway. The stage was sleek, minimalist, with a massive screen behind the podium, and then my blood turned to ice. Ben walked onto the stage, my husband, looking impossibly handsome and confident. He smiled that dazzling smile of his, and the crowd of journalists and tech bloggers went wild. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "Today, my partner and I are thrilled to introduce you to the next step in social evolution. Today, we introduce you to Evolve." Behind him, the screen lit up with the Evolve logo. It was Sarah's design. It was the exact same color palette, the same font, the same aesthetic she had created for ConnectSphere. My heart started to pound, a frantic, wild drum against my ribs. No, it couldn't be. Sarah walked on stage to a fresh wave of applause. She stood beside Ben, my best friend beside my husband. They were a power couple. They beamed at each other, a shared look of triumph passing between them. I was watching my life, my work, my future being stolen from me in real time, broadcast to the entire world. Evolve is the culmination of years of hard work, Sarah said, her voice full of fake humility. Ben and I poured our hearts and souls into creating a platform that, I didn't hear the rest. I was already scrambling, my hands shaking as I tried to log into our company server. Access denied. My credentials had been revoked. I tried my email. Password incorrect. Locked out. I tried to access the patent application we were supposed to have filed together. I found it online. It had been filed at 5:17 a.m. that morning, under two names, Benjamin Carter and Sarah Chen. My name was nowhere. The room started to spin. I was suffocating. I stumbled to my feet, grabbing my keys, my mind a blank wall of static. I had to get there. I had to stop them. As I ran out the door, my personal email pinged. It was from Ben. The subject line read, "A formal notice." The email was cold, corporate, brutal. It was a termination letter. It accused me of gross professional misconduct and attempted theft of intellectual property, citing fabricated evidence of my attempts to sell the company's code to a competitor. It informed me that my partnership had been dissolved, effective immediately. It was signed by both of them, my husband and my best friend. They hadn't just stolen my work, they had meticulously built a case to brand me as the thief. They were erasing me from my own story. I don't remember driving. I remember the sound of my own ragged breathing, the blur of traffic lights, and the slick feel of the steering wheel under my sweaty palms. My car's radio was on, tuned to a news station, and their voices, my husband's and my best friend's, were everywhere. A triumphant chorus of betrayal. They were talking about their journey, their vision, their synergy. They were using words I had taught them to describe a product they hadn't built. They were parasites, and I was the host they had just bled dry. I screeched to a halt in front of the gleaming glass tower where the press conference was being held. I left the car double parked, the engine still running. I sprinted through the revolving doors, my heels clicking frantically on the polished marble floor. A security guard, a large man with a bored expression, stepped in front of me. "Can I help you, ma'am? I need to get in there," I gasped, pointing a shaking finger towards the ballroom. That's my company. My husband is on that stage." He looked me up and down, taking in my wild eyes and disheveled suit. "Press pass? No, I'm the founder, Lena Carter." His expression softened with a flicker of pity. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's a closed event. You're not on the list." Just then, the doors to the ballroom swung open, and a wave of reporters spilled out, buzzing with excitement. And then I saw them. Ben and Sarah, surrounded by a throng of admirers, were walking towards the lobby. They were glowing, radiant, with success. Sarah caught my eye first. The color drained from her face. She looked away instantly, grabbing Ben's arm. He turned, and our eyes met across the crowded lobby. There was no flicker of guilt in his gaze, no hint of remorse, just a cold, hard annoyance. The look a king gives a peasant who has wandered into the throne room by mistake. He gave a subtle shake of his head to the security guard. I was a problem to be handled. I pushed past the guard, a desperate guttural sound tearing from my throat. "Ben! Sarah! How could you?" He didn't even flinch. He simply turned to the reporters, a look of profound sadness on his face. "Please forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice a perfect symphony of pain and compassion. This is the woman I mentioned, my former partner. As you can imagine, this is a very difficult and painful situation for all of us. Security, could you please see that she gets home safely? She's not well." Not well. The words hung in the air. A public branding. I was not a founder. I was not a partner. I was a hysterical, unwell woman. The security guard took my arm gently but firmly. "Come on, ma'am. Let's go." I was escorted out of the building like a madwoman, the flashes of cameras following me, capturing my ultimate humiliation for the morning news. That night, the narrative was set in stone. Ben and Sarah Carter, the brilliant, tragic power couple, betrayed by their unstable third partner who had cracked under the pressure. My name, Lena Vaughn, was now a footnote in my own life story, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. My first week of freedom was spent in a legal nightmare. I found a pro bono lawyer, a tired but kind man named Mr. Davies, who listened to my story with a sympathetic ear. But when he saw the evidence they had manufactured, he shook his head. They had been meticulous. Forged emails showing me trying to sell code snippets to a shell company they had created. Server logs, which they controlled, showing I had downloaded the entire code base to an external drive the night before the launch. And the patent, a thick official document bearing their names and a government seal. Lena, Mr. Davies said, his voice gentle, your name is on none of the legal documents. The patent is theirs. They have a documented history of your erratic behavior. You have no money, and they have a team of the best corporate lawyers in the state. To fight this, it would take years and millions of dollars you don't have. And honestly, I don't think we could win. It was a legal checkmate. They hadn't just stolen my work. They had made the truth itself legally inadmissible. The months that followed were a free-fall. Evolve, my Connect sphere, became a global phenomenon. It was the fastest-growing app in history. Ben and Sarah were on the cover of Forbes, of Wired, hailed as the new Steve Jobs and Wozniak. Their faces were everywhere, on billboards and magazines, on TV. They were the darlings of the tech world, their story a perfect fairy tale of innovation and love. Meanwhile, I was living in a cramped sublet apartment, my savings gone, my reputation in tatters. I tried to find work, but my name was poison. The story of my betrayal was the first thing that came up in a Google search. No one would hire a brilliant coder with a history of stealing intellectual property. I was blacklisted, untouchable. I sold my car to pay rent. I lived on instant noodles and the bitter dregs of my pride. The world was celebrating my creation, while I was slowly starving to death in its shadow. The darkest moment came on a rainy Tuesday, 6 months after the theft. I was sitting in my dark apartment, the glow of my laptop the only light. On the screen was a live interview with Ben and Sarah. They were announcing a new round of funding that valued Evolve at $500 million. Sarah was wearing a beautiful diamond necklace, a design I had once sketched out for her on a napkin. And Ben was telling the story of the name. I was the one who came up with Evolve, he said, smiling that billion-dollar smile. Because it's about moving forward. It's about leaving the past behind and evolving into something better, stronger. He looked at Sarah, a look of pure adoration on his face. He was talking about me. I was the past they had left behind. Something inside me snapped. The grief, the despair, the helpless rage, it all collapsed inward, creating a vacuum. And in that vacuum, a memory sparked. A memory from a late night, a year ago. It was 3 a.m, and I was deep in the code, building the core architecture of the app. A sudden cold thought had washed over me, a flicker of professional paranoia that every programmer knows. What if I get hit by a bus? What if I get locked out? What if they try to steal this from me? It was a fleeting thought, a ghost of an idea, but I had acted on it. In the deepest, most fundamental layer of the code, in the very heart of the system that managed all user data and financial transactions, I had built a backdoor. It wasn't a virus. It was a kill switch, a hidden, undocumented subroutine that lay dormant, invisible to any diagnostic scan. I called it Project Chimera. It could only be activated by a unique 256-bit encrypted key, a key that was disguised as a harmless line of commented-out code. And the key itself was a password I had never told anyone, a phrase from a book my deceased mother used to read to me. For a year, I had completely forgotten about it. It was a paranoid afterthought, a secret I had buried under a mountain of work and trust. But now, in the darkness of my ruined life, it glowed like a beacon. They thought they had stolen my creation. They had no idea that my creation was still and would always be loyal to its true creator. They were living in a beautiful glass palace, basking in the adoration of the world, but they had built their palace on a digital fault line, and I was the only one who knew how to trigger the earthquake. I pushed the laptop away and stood up. The woman who had wept, who had starved, who had despaired, was gone. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-slicked city. They were out there, in their penthouse apartment, drinking champagne, celebrating their $500 million lie. They felt untouchable. They were at the top of the world, and from the top of the world, it is a very, very long way to fall. The existence of Project Chimera changed everything. It was a single point of light in an endless, suffocating darkness. The rage that had been a wild, directionless firestorm inside me now had a focus. It became a forge, and in that forge I began to craft the weapon of my revenge. The first step was survival. I couldn't launch a counteroffensive from a battlefield of poverty and despair. I needed resources. I needed to get back on my feet, not as a coder, but as someone else. I sold my high-end laptop, my last connection to the world I had built, and bought a cheap, refurbished one with cash. I then took a job that was a universe away from Silicon Valley. I became a line cook at a greasy 24-hour diner called The Night Owl. It was a humbling, back-breaking job, flipping pancakes and frying eggs for truckers and college students. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and bacon grease. My hands, once accustomed to the delicate dance on a keyboard, were now raw from scrubbing grills and plunging into sinks of hot, soapy water. It was brutal. It was exhausting, and it was the perfect camouflage. No one in that noisy, chaotic kitchen knew or cared about the disgraced tech genius from the headlines. I was just Lena, the quiet woman who was surprisingly fast on the grill. The job paid just enough to cover my rent and groceries, and it gave me what I needed most: anonymity and a routine. While my days were spent in a world of clattering dishes and sizzling oil, my nights were dedicated to Project Chimera. My tiny apartment transformed into a digital war room. I lived like a ghost, my curtains always drawn, my existence reduced to the glow of my monitor. I wasn't just planning a simple hack. A simple deletion of the app would be a tantrum, not a victory. I wanted to dismantle their empire, brick by digital brick, and I wanted the whole world to watch. My first task was to regain access. My original key, the phrase from my mother's book, was the only way to activate the subroutine. But I couldn't just type it in from my cheap laptop. They had the best cybersecurity money could buy. Any direct attempt to access the server's core would trigger alarms. I needed to get inside their system, to create a secure, invisible tunnel from which I could launch my attack. I needed a way in. Ben and Sarah, in their infinite arrogance, gave it to me. I started by studying them, not as the people I once loved, but as systems, as networks with vulnerabilities. I watched their interviews, read their articles, and scoured their social media. Sarah's vulnerability was her vanity. She had a new personal assistant, a young, star-struck girl who managed her schedule, and, as I discovered through some careful social engineering, her personal Wi-Fi password at her new condo. It was pathetically simple: Evolve Star 2025. A few hours of work parked in a van half a block away, and I was inside her home network. Ben's vulnerability was his sloppiness. He was the big picture guy. He didn't care about the details. He used the same password for almost everything, a mix of his old college nickname and his birth year. Through Sarah's network, I was able to access the shared cloud storage where they kept their corporate documents. And there, in a folder marked Marketing, I found it. A spreadsheet containing the login credentials for Evolve's corporate social media accounts. He had saved it in plain text. It was the digital equivalent of leaving the keys to the kingdom under the doormat. I now had the keys. I could post as them, tweet as them, but it was still just surface access. I needed to get to the server's core, where Chimera lay sleeping. For that, I needed a Trojan horse, and I knew exactly what kind to build. In one of their interviews, Sarah had talked enthusiastically about a new feature they were about to launch, a Charity Connect module that would allow users to donate to causes directly through the app. It was her pet project, a way to add a veneer of social consciousness to their ruthless capitalism. I knew she would be personally overseeing its development. I spent the next 3 months, night after sleepless night, writing the most elegant, most beautiful, most malicious piece of code of my life. On the surface, it was a flawless, fully functional charity module. It had a beautiful user interface and seamless integration with the existing app, but buried deep within its code, encrypted and hidden, was a payload, a tiny perfect worm designed to do one thing. Once the module was integrated into the main Evolve system, the worm would crawl through their network, find the dormant Chimera subroutine, and create a secure encrypted link between it and a remote anonymous server I controlled. It would give me a direct, untraceable command line to the heart of their empire. The delivery had to be perfect. I couldn't just email them the code. I created a fake identity for a freelance programmer, Martin Held, from Germany, a supposed specialist in secure financial transaction modules for apps. Posing as Martin, I sent a polite professional email to Sarah, praising her work on the charity feature and offering my own, improved version of the donation code as a professional courtesy. I attached a snippet of the code, just enough to show its elegance and efficiency. Sarah, vain and always eager to take credit for others' work, was intrigued. She wrote back asking for the full module to evaluate. Martin, she wrote, this is very impressive. Your approach to secure transactions is innovative. Send me the full package. If it's as good as it looks, I may have a consulting position for you on our team. That was it. The door was open. I sent her the Trojan horse, beautifully gift-wrapped. I then watched, my heart in my throat, as the server logs showed her uploading my code to their internal development server for testing. For a week, I held my breath. I barely ate. I barely slept. I just watched the logs, waiting. And then, on a Tuesday night at 2:17 a.m., it happened. A single tiny notification on my command screen. A connection had been established. My worm had found its target. Chimera was awake, and it was waiting for my command. I had a direct, undetectable line to the core of Evolve. I could see everything: user data, financial transactions, internal emails. I was God inside the machine they thought they owned. The temptation to strike immediately was almost overwhelming. I could have brought them down right then, in the dead of night, but that wasn't the plan. A quiet, overnight collapse wasn't enough. They had humiliated me in public. I would execute them in public. I needed a stage. I needed an audience. I needed the whole world to be watching when their glass palace came crashing down. So I waited. I watched them. I gathered data. And I began to build the final phase of my weapon. Chimera wasn't just a kill switch. I began adding to it, writing new commands. I didn't just want to delete the app. I wanted to turn it into a weapon against them. I programmed it to, on my command, seize control of every screen it was displayed on. I programmed it to hijack their user database and their corporate bank accounts. I let them have another 6 months of glory. I watched them buy yachts, appear on talk shows, and bask in the adoration of millions. I watched their net worth climb into the hundreds of millions. I let them climb higher and higher up the mountain of their own arrogance, all the while knowing that I was the one who controlled the avalanche. The perfect moment, the perfect stage, came in the form of an announcement that made the entire tech world buzz. The global tech conglomerate, Omnicorp, was acquiring Evolve for $1 billion. The deal would be officially announced and signed at the annual World Tech Summit, the biggest, most watched tech conference on the planet. Ben and Sarah would be the keynote speakers. The stage was set. The audience was gathered. The execution date was marked on my calendar. The announcement of the Omnicorp acquisition was not a news bulletin. It was a global event. It was the lead story on every tech blog, every financial network, every major news outlet. Evolve's billion-dollar coronation, one headline screamed. Carter and Chen, the new royal couple of tech, read another. Their faces were plastered everywhere, the architects of a modern fairy tale. They looked so happy, so untouchable. They had no idea they were just ghosts, living in a machine that was already haunted. For me, the news was not a shock. It was a starting pistol. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. Their greed had delivered them, bound and gagged, to the perfect execution chamber, the main stage of the World Tech Summit. A bigger stage, a more public forum, did not exist. My life became a study in aesthetic focus. The diner became a distant memory. I cashed out the last of my savings, knowing it was the final investment I would ever need to make. My world shrank to the 4 walls of my motel room and the infinite universe behind my laptop screen. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was forging the blade. Project Chimera, my secret backdoor, was no longer just a kill switch. It was evolving, growing under my guidance into a multi-headed beast of vengeance. For weeks, I did nothing but write code, my fingers flying across the keyboard in a furious, silent dance. Each line was a prayer to the gods of retribution. The first head of the Chimera was the thief. I programmed a script that, upon activation, would silently and systematically copy every piece of data from their personal and corporate accounts, every email, every text message, every Slack conversation, every private photo they had ever stored on their cloud. I wanted the complete, unvarnished history of their betrayal, from their first flirtatious message to their final, gloating email about the Omnicorp deal. I wanted their entire digital lives in my hands. The second head was the propagandist. This was the most complex part. I wrote a presentation AI, a piece of software that could, on my command, hijack the audio-visual system of the convention center. It was designed to override any existing presentation, seize control of the main screen, and broadcast its own content. The content it would broadcast was the data stolen by the thief, elegantly packaged into a devastating, chronological narrative of their crime. It would show their loving messages to each other while I was coding through the night. It would show their plans to frame me. It would show the original ConnectSphere files, complete with my name and the original timestamps, right next to the stolen Evolve files. It would be an undeniable high-definition confession. The third and final head of the beast was the executioner. This was the simplest, most brutal piece of code. It was a single, irrevocable command. Upon activation of the final sequence, it would execute a transfer of every liquid asset from Evolve's corporate accounts. It would not transfer the money to me. Stealing their money would make me a thief, just like them. No, my code was more poetic. It was programmed to instantly liquidate their holdings and distribute the entire sum, hundreds of millions of dollars, in equal, untraceable microtransactions to a list of 100 different charities. Specifically, charities that supported women and girls in technology. Their monument to greed would become their legacy of forced philanthropy. They would be ruined, and a new generation of women like me would rise from their ashes. 2 weeks before the summit, they gave me the final piece of motivation I didn't even know I needed. They sat down for a televised interview with a famous journalist. It was a puff piece, a celebration of their genius. The journalist eventually asked the inevitable question about their troubled beginning. "It must have been so difficult," the journalist said, her voice dripping with sympathy, "to have your partner, your friend, betray you like that." Ben's face became a mask of noble suffering. He took Sarah's hand. "It was the hardest thing we've ever been through," he said. "We loved Lena, but she was fragile. The pressure got to her. She wanted to take a shortcut, to sell out. We had to make a choice. Let her destroy our dream or save it. We chose to save the dream." But it was Sarah's comment that truly sealed their fate. She leaned forward, a single perfect tear rolling down her cheek. "The saddest part," she whispered, her voice cracking, "is that the Lena we knew, the brilliant, passionate coder, she was gone long before the company was. We were just the ones who had to sign the death certificate." I sat in my dingy motel room, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, and I felt nothing but a profound, chilling calm. They were so busy telling the story of my death that they had never once considered the possibility of my resurrection. The week of the World Tech Summit, I took a bus to San Francisco. I didn't stay in a fancy hotel. I checked into a cheap, anonymous motel just across the street from the colossal convention center. My room had a cracked window, a lumpy bed, and a perfect, unobstructed line of sight to the main building. It was my sniper's nest. I spent 2 days setting up my simple equipment, my laptop, a series of backup power supplies, and 3 different redundant internet connections. I was leaving nothing to chance. I hacked into the convention center's public Wi-Fi, not to use it, but to monitor it. I could see the digital pulse of the building, the thousands of devices connecting, the flow of data. I found the specific network channel for the main presentation hall's AV system. My propagandist code was ready to be injected the moment the presentation began. plan. The night before the summit, I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness, looking at the convention center, a great glittering beast of glass and steel. It was alive with activity, crews setting up lights and sound for the biggest tech event of the year. Ben and Sarah were probably at some lavish pre-party, drinking champagne, accepting congratulations, the king and queen on the eve of their coronation. They felt like gods, masters of their universe. I opened my laptop. My command screen was simple. It was a black screen with a single line of text, Project Chimera, standing by. Below it was a single blinking cursor. All it needed was the final activation key, my mother's phrase. I thought about the past year, the humiliation, the hunger, the despair. I thought about the friendships I had lost, the life I had lost. I thought about Ben's cold, empty eyes in the lobby. And I thought about Sarah's final damning words. We were just the ones who had to sign the death certificate. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. She was right, but she had gotten the name on the certificate wrong. Tomorrow, the whole world would be watching as I signed theirs. The day of the World Tech Summit dawned bright and clear, a perfect California morning. From my cracked motel window, I watched the river of people flow into the convention center. Journalists with their heavy cameras, eager tech disciples in their company-branded hoodies, and stone-faced venture capitalists in their $1,000 suits. They were all flocking to witness the coronation of the king and queen of lies. I felt no nerves, no fear, just a cold, clean certainty, the same feeling I used to get when I knew absolutely that a complex piece of code was about to compile without a single error. I didn't watch the opening acts. I didn't care about the self-driving cars or the new advancements in quantum computing. My focus was on a single screen, a simple command line window on my laptop. It was my connection to the beast, to Chimera. I watched the summit's internal schedule. At 2 p.m., the keynote address was set to begin. At 1:55 p.m., I began my final sequence. My fingers moved with a life of their own, typing a series of commands. I injected my propagandist code into the AV system's network buffer, a digital time bomb waiting for a trigger. I established a final secure link to Chimera's executioner module, priming it for the final command. The system was armed. All that was left was the key. On the live stream, the host's voice boomed. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the minds behind the fastest growing application in history, the visionaries who taught the world to evolve. Please welcome to the stage Benjamin Carter and Sarah Chen. The roar of the crowd was deafening, even through my cheap laptop speakers. They walked on stage, holding hands, bathed in a brilliant white spotlight. They looked like gods. Ben, in a sharp, dark suit, radiated a confident power. Sarah, in a sleek, minimalist white dress, was the picture of grace and innovation. They were at the absolute zenith of their stolen world. Ben stepped to the podium, his billion-dollar smile flashing to the thousands in attendance. "Thank you," he began, his voice echoing through the hall. "1 year ago, we stood at a crossroads. We had a dream to change the way the world connects. It was a long, hard road, paved with sacrifice." He was so good. His words were a hypnotic blend of ambition and humility. As he spoke, I opened a new window on my screen, one that showed me the live feed from my Thief module. I saw their bank accounts, the numbers impossibly large, a constellation of zeros that represented a galaxy of my stolen work. "We had to make difficult choices," Ben continued, his voice taking on a somber tone. "We had to leave the past behind in order to build the future." That was my cue. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to sign the death certificate. I began to type the key, the phrase from my mother's book, the one she whispered to me on nights when I was scared of the dark. "The stars listen for the truth." I hit enter. For a single heart-stopping second, nothing happened. And then, in the convention hall, the giant Evolve logo on the screen behind Ben and Sarah flickered. It happened so fast most people probably missed it, but the tech crew at the side of the stage saw it. I could see them on a secondary feed, their faces etched with confusion, frantically tapping at their consoles. Ben didn't notice. He was in his element. And that future is Evolve, a platform built on a foundation of trust and transparency. And then it happened. The Evolve logo didn't just flicker. It dissolved, pixel by pixel, melting away into nothing. It was replaced by a simple, elegant line of white text on a black screen, in the exact font I had designed for ConnectSphere. The text read, "A message from the true architect of Evolve." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Ben stopped mid-sentence, his smile faltering as he saw the text on the prompter in front of him. He turned, and his face went pale as he saw the screen. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Before they could react, the screen changed again. My face, a high-resolution photo I had taken just an hour before, filled the 10-foot screen. My expression was calm, my eyes looking out at the audience with an unnerving intensity. The screen then split into two. On the left, my face. On the right, a series of their private text messages began to scroll, time-stamped from the year before the launch. Sarah, he thinks you're working late again? Ben, of course. The little coder is too busy changing the world to notice anything. Her focus is our greatest asset. The murmur in the crowd grew louder, angrier. People were pulling out their phones, recording. On stage, Ben was frantically, uselessly, tapping the podium, trying to regain control. "There seems to be a technical difficulty," he stammered, his voice tight with panic. But my program was in complete control. The next slide showed the original ConnectSphere code files, my name as the author dated 2 years ago. Beside it, the Evolve code with their names, dated at 5:17 a.m. on the day of the theft. The proof was absolute, irrefutable, a digital Rosetta Stone of their crime. "This is a malicious hack," Sarah shrieked into the microphone, her voice shrill with terror. "Our security is being compromised." As if in response, a new line of text appeared below the evidence. My security was compromised first, and then came the final blow. My Chimera code activated its most devastating feature. A push notification sent from Evolve's own servers was simultaneously delivered to every single phone in that auditorium. Their screens all lit up with the same message. The full story of Evolve's theft, including all internal emails and financial records, has been downloaded to your device. A gasp. A collective intake of breath from 1,000 people at once filled the room. The chaos erupted. The audience was no longer watching the stage. They were staring at their phones, their faces illuminated by the glow of the truth. They were all witnesses. They were all jurors. On stage, Ben and Sarah were trapped, digitally crucified in front of the entire world. They were surrounded by the ghosts of their own lies, their faces frozen in masks of pure, unadulterated horror. They were at the top of the world, and they had just been pushed off the edge. In my motel room, I leaned back in my chair, the cacophony from the live stream washing over me. I took a calm sip of my cold coffee. The final command was still waiting. The executioner was ready. In my motel room, I watched the chaos unfold on a dozen different news feeds at once. Ben's pathetic denial, Sarah's hysterical shrieks, the confused roar of the crowd. It was a symphony of destruction, and I was its conductor. But the final note had not yet been played. On my screen, the single blinking cursor waited. Project Chimera, awaiting final command. My fingers moved to the keyboard not with anger, but with a strange, solemn peace. I typed the final command, execute, philanthropy, protocol. On the main stage of the World Tech Summit, as security guards tried to push through the panicked crowd to reach the stage, the image on the giant screen changed one last time. My face, the text messages, the evidence, it all vanished. It was replaced by a simple, elegant progress bar. Above it, a single line of text, transferring Evolve's assets to the future of tech. Ben, who was in the middle of being restrained by a large security guard, saw the screen. A new, more profound horror washed over his face, a terror that went beyond public humiliation. "No," he breathed, his voice a dry whisper. "No, no, no." The progress bar filled with a quiet, relentless speed. 100,203,000. The crowd, now realizing what they were witnessing, fell into a hushed awe. They were watching the public execution of a corporation. The bar hit its final target, the full liquid assets of their stolen empire, a sum just over $400 million. The bar turned green. The text changed. Transfer complete. Thank you for your donation. and then the screen went black. The show was over. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The billion-dollar Omnicorp deal evaporated in a puff of smoke. The stock market suspended trading of their parent company's shares before they could crash to zero. The Securities and Exchange Commission, alerted by 100 different sources at once, froze everything that was left. But there was nothing left to freeze. The money was gone, scattered to the digital winds, already populating the bank accounts of 100 charities dedicated to empowering women in the tech industry. Ben and Sarah were arrested that evening, not for stealing my code, but for massive, spectacular securities fraud. Their lie to their investors, to the public, to the world, was now a matter of public record. Their faces, once gracing the covers of magazines, were now plastered across the internet in the form of humiliating mugshots. Their empire had not just crumbled, it had been vaporized, its ashes repurposed to fund their replacements. And me? I disappeared. I took my cheap laptop, formatted the hard drive, and snapped it in half, tossing the pieces into 2 different dumpsters. I checked out of the motel, took a bus to the airport, and used the last of my cash to buy a one-way ticket to a small, quiet town in Oregon I'd only ever seen on a map. I needed silence. I needed to remember who I was before I became a ghost. My name was cleared in a matter of weeks. The digital evidence was so overwhelming that the original case against me was dismissed with a public apology from the district attorney's office. I was offered book deals, movie rights, a dozen different high-paying jobs from companies that now saw me not as a liability, but as a legend. I turned them all down. I spent a year in that small town working in a local library surrounded by the quiet company of books. I went for long walks in the woods. I learned to breathe again. I let the noise of the world fade away. Ben and Sarah were sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. I didn't watch the trial. Their story was over. It was time for me to start writing mine again. A year to the day after the World Tech Summit, I moved back to Silicon Valley. I didn't come back for a job. I came back to build. The charities that had received the money from Evolve's corporate accounts had been baffled by the anonymous 8-figure donations. But I knew where the money was. I founded a new organization, a nonprofit incubator called the Chimera Initiative. Its mission was simple: to find and fund brilliant, overlooked female founders in the tech industry, the ones with revolutionary ideas but no access to the old boys club of venture capital. We don't have a flashy office. We don't chase billion-dollar valuations. We build, we support, we create. My new language is not just one of code, but of mentorship and empowerment. The women we fund are building the real future, a future based on integrity, not theft. Sometimes a young coder will come into my office, nervous and full of passion, and tell me about the app she's building. She'll tell me her story, and I'll tell her a little bit of mine. I'll tell her that the most important thing you can build isn't a product, it's a reputation. They tried to erase me. They stole my code, my name, my life, but they made a critical error. They thought my creation was the app. They never understood that my real creation, the one they could never steal, was the mind that built it. And that mind was now building an army. My name is Lena, and I learned that you can't kill an idea by stealing it. You only make it angry. And an angry idea doesn't just want justice. It wants to change the world. What would you build on the ashes of your old life? I'd love to read your ideas in the comments. To help us build this community, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of creation and justice. Thank you for listening.